Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective. Let's talk about how atheists justifies God by their claims we reject him. Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. I want to unpack a video that was put out by Mindshift, the Mindshift YouTube channel, and his name is Brandon. And he was actually doing a response to Mike Winger's response to Christy Burke. Now, Mike Winger, I'm not going to focus on him. He has a huge following. He's a Christian pastor. I said he has a huge following. And I'm not going to even focus on so much as I am going to focus on Christy Burke's statement that caused Mike Winger to respond. Then, of course, which is causing Brandon to respond. I'll let Brandon speak for himself. But the reason why I am responding because she makes a statement that he, of course, agrees with, that to me is so spot on. When I say spot on, I mean it justifies God. And I know that's not their intent, but their statement that we reject God, and then the reasons why they reject God, in reality justifies him. Now, before I get to the video and start unpacking it, let me just make a statement. In Genesis 1, the very first statement in the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I want that to stick in your mind because right here is this makes the entire argument fall apart. And I'll explain as we move on in the video. But remember, we start off with the claims of the Bible, which they don't believe. They rejected the claim of the Bible. They reject the Bible's truth. They reject the existence of God. Yet, they spend all of their YouTube videos on trying to debunk the logic of God, the truth of God. Now, even though they do not hold to the biblical truth, in fact, not only do they reject the biblical God, remember they say he doesn't exist. So why do they spend all of their YouTubes trying to erase or debunk this non-existent God? The reality is this: they're trying to turn people away from following God. Now, and what they're going to say is that following God, and this is now my inserting here, is harmful or evil or immoral. In fact, that's not me saying it. Actually, Christy has said that. Now, I've been responding to some of her videos, and because I find their arguments compelling enough to me respond to, that I think that as Christians we should respond to them. I don't find their statements insulting. I don't find their statements condescending, or I'm not bothered by them. I'm curious. I'm fascinated when you have these two ex-Christians who are now atheists, but then now it seems that their mission in life is to turn as many people away from the notion of a non-existing God. So the other thing is that we can probably ask is, why is it that important to them? Why does that drive them to seek out to turn people away from a non-existing God? So if you say, like for example, he's going to use Moloch, god, the pagan god that's found in the Bible. And in Moloch, the invention of Moloch, okay, was invented by men, but was so hideous and evil that one of the most hideous commands of Moloch was to please him, you had to offer your child in fire. You had to, it was to in the King James it says to cause your children to pass through the fire. Okay, that was, you would take an infant child and you would, burn him on the arms of Moloch, the god Moloch. Okay. Now, if people were following that god, I would say that's bad. Now, and also we have to look at, why do we think that that is so bad? So now we have to kind of come back to, how do we establish right and wrong, good and evil? Because these are concepts that God gave us, which they reject. They reject the God of the Bible, the Abrahamic God. So if in their case you said that God doesn't exist, and now it is your mission to turn people away from that God, because that it is bad to follow God, it is evil to follow God, then that means you have a better way. And what is interesting to me is that they're not pointing that better way. They're just kind of focused on saying, well, God is evil. And I acknowledge that I have not listened to all of their videos. So they might have, hey, pointed out or giving what would be the better wisdom, which would be the more pure way, the good way, the moral way. I'm going to acknowledge, because I have to say I haven't listened to all. I'm new to listening to them, and I do listen to them. I get, as I said, I find their arguments fascinating. I don't agree with them. I think they are disingenuous. Okay, and the reason why I think they are disingenuous is for one reason. Okay, let me kind of go back to the thumbnail here, and it's kind of cut off, but this is what it says: why God's existence wouldn't be enough to become a Christian. That's what the rest of it says. Why God's existence wouldn't be enough to become a Christian. And that's astounding. See, that's astounding. That statement alone. I'm getting ready to play another the clip from which that she's going to make an even more astounding statement. Now he agrees with this. He's going to reiterate that. And but if we say, we kind of go back. I want to go back to this moment now. If we say that God doesn't exist, that's their position. God doesn't exist. And all of this time that they're spending on a non-existent God. And by the way, Christianity seems to be the worst to them, because there's still millions of gods in the world today. There are thousands. Now we could sum up a lot of the top 3 world religions that consumes the majority of the population of the earth. But within a lot of these religions, and I want to say Christianity included. In other words, Christianity has thousands of denominations, okay? But there are different other kind of religions, right? But to them, the most, and this is my insertion, the one that's doing the most damage is Christianity. Now I could be wrong, and I would acknowledge that that may not be their sole thing. And as we listen to the video, I do believe I'm going to get corrected on that statement. Okay, but um, but the fact that they want to spend the time saying, okay, that God doesn't exist. So if God doesn't exist, so then tell me then, on what basis do you then establish the right and wrong, the morality? I would love to hear that. I really have not heard atheists declare that. And again, I'm going to acknowledge I just haven't heard it. I'm not. I'm certainly not saying there's not atheists that haven't done with it. I have heard some express that yes, we have morality. What I'm asking is on what basis do they establish their right and wrong? Now, Christy and Brandon, and this is my charge, establishes their morality based upon the ex-Christianity they reject. In other words, when they left Christianity, did they say, here are a new set of thoughts in terms of good and evil, morality? Or did they keep the same one that they were taught while they were Christians? So, for example, if you take the Ten Commandments, so obviously the first two, they're certainly not going to, they reject that. So the whole first two God commandments, right? But what about thou shalt not steal? Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, possessions. Would they say those are good commandments? Because remember, they came from God. God gave us that. God gave us those commandments to live by. Right? So did you change your way of thinking? So let's look at this first clip. Here we go.
Welcome to Mindshift. I'm Brandon, and today is another Saturday Short. Now, this one should be pretty quick, and it's going to be a bit Inception-like in the fact that I am making a response video to Mike Winger, who is making a response video to Christy Burke. Both of their clips are really short, so this won't take much time, and I do want to point out a few caveats. One,
Okay, so that's just an introduction. I want you to see how he's introducing himself. But in this next clip here, this is the one he was talking about, the clip that Mike Winger responded to. But I want to really listen to this. Listen to this.
If the biblical God came down from heaven right now and stood in front of me and proved to me that he exists, I still would not worship him.
Let's suppose.
All right, did you hear that? I'm going to play it again, but did you hear that? All right, let's, because that's important. Listen.
If the biblical God came down from heaven right now and stood in front of me and proved to me that he exists, I still would not worship him.
Let's suppose.
Okay, now I'm not going to get into, again, Mike Winger's response. I'm going to respond to Brandon, okay? But what I wanted you to hear, and I might play this just one more time because this is astounding. So listen again.
If the biblical God came down from heaven right now and stood in front of me and proved to me that he exists, I still would not worship him.
Let's suppose Christianity was true. Would you follow Jesus?
Okay, so listen to what she just said. If the biblical God came down and proved to her that he exists, she still wouldn't follow him. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. One, the absurdity that if God came down, so that's the first thing, if God came down. So the concept of God, let's go back to the biblical concept of God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the concept of God. So you're talking about a person who then, like, if I declare to you that I'm God, don't believe it. And trust me, you wouldn't have far to go to not believe it. Because I'm not a God. I cannot demonstrate that I'm a God. And there are a lot of men and women who have tried to say that they were gods, okay? And strangely enough, some of these same people have led people to their destruction, like Jim Jones and David Koresh, to list a few. There are a lot more. But here is the biblical God that she says, the biblical God who claims to have created the heavens and the earth. And she said, I would stand in front of that God and said, I'm not going to follow you. Now, I believe her wholeheartedly, because this is exactly what God said sinful man would do. This is exactly. When we look at the Bible and we see the one of the threads from Genesis to Revelations, one of those important threads is just how sinful man is. And it doesn't matter what God does. Doesn't matter. That sinful man is going to reject God, period. Now, their claims is that Christine Brandon and other atheists, they will claim that the reason why that they are rejecting God is because he's a monster. I don't agree with what he is or isn't doing. Like, why does he let suffering go? Why does he persist in allowing evil to happen? So based upon that, and Christie has said this, based upon that, I'm going to say he doesn't exist. Not the fact that I just disagree with him, but I'm going to say he doesn't exist. Now that's, again, to me, that's an absurd thought, because again, you're going to stand before a being who proves to you that he is God, meaning he created the heavens and the earth. He has the power to create the heavens and the earth, and you think you're going to have enough audacity to wag your finger in his face. Well, let me just say this too before I go on, because here is the weakness of my argument. I cannot prove the existence of God. I cannot prove the might of God. I'm going to say God is going to have to prove himself or demonstrate or reveal his existence. I will also say he will do that. He's just not going to do it according to what Christie or Brandon demands. That's all. There is going to come a day when God will speak, when God will reveal himself, where God will judge sin and wickedness. I dare say she's not going to like it. But see but that's up to God to do that. I can't. So in some respects, it's kind of foolish of me to try to make an argument for God on that basis, because, okay, right now, I know what the Bible says, like God is silent. It's just they don't understand it. The other side of the argument is that it is an absurd argument, because regardless of what you don't have enough information to make this declaration that God is unjust or evil or immoral, and they do make these claims. You don't have enough information. So for example, if you say, well, God, why did you do this? And whatever her complaint is, she doesn't have enough information. And oftentimes, remember, we don't always have the information for us to make just conclusions. We don't. Whether you agree with them or not, we don't always have uh, enough information. And certainly, you're asking about something that happened 4,000 years ago. So again, God, why did you allow whatever the thing is? And they have a whole host of it, a whole list of what they think, what makes God, which disqualifies God from even existing. Remember, their logic is because of the Bible's claim, then this God cannot exist, which again is absurd. The other thing is that, as I said, remember, they're ex-Christians. And so if I were to assume that they are Americans, that they live in America or in a free nation, that one, their morality comes from the Constitution, which comes from the Bible. Some of it, right? And even though America was evil in its inception, and I'm going to kind of backtrack and say, here's again, do we have enough information? We have some when it comes to America, because as a black man, I could say slavery, bad. And I'll say this too, at the sidebar, I have a lot of issues with the condoning of slavery in the Bible, okay? I'm going to come back to that in a moment because, yeah, though I have great disagreements, well, I have great concerns, does that justify me to then condemn God? I'll come back to that. When we talk about America in terms of now how people in America were evil because of slavery, then we can say this. The fact that the document itself, the Constitution, that was written, and written by evil men, is why America was able to overcome the evil. Not the people. People today are still racist. But the law, we were able to overcome slavery and Jim Crow because of what was written. Another issue, excuse me, is that when we talk about the fact that however God decides to, or what, you go back here, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's his earth. It's his heavens. It's his creation. And he can do what he wills with it. So he says, I want this to happen, right? I want these kinds of rules. Let's say you want to judge God on the basis of his rules. As I said, and they do this. You take the 10 Commandments. The commandments where God says don't have any other gods before me, they take the greatest issues with. But the other commandments that says, well, don't steal, don't kill, don't cover your neighbor's goods, your possessions, don't cover your neighbor's wife, don't commit adultery. Well, maybe adultery, who knows what adultery, right? A lot of people in the world today may say, okay, adultery is okay, don't have an issue with adultery. But certainly when it comes to things that hurt you, those commandments are good. But then you look at this other issue to circle back around where she says, I would not follow God even if he exists. And the reason why she thinks she could wag her finger, and Brandon, in God's face is because he's evil. And as we're going to see, they're going to make a lot of claims that they themselves have to live by. See, they are influenced by the Christian thought, the Christian paradigm. And they can make these grandiose claims in America. But what if you went to Russia? What if you lived in Russia? What if you lived in North Korea? Would you have the same freedoms? Would you have the same audacity? Maybe. But look at those who try to come against Putin. And see, I could sit up and tell you that I could speak boastful things against Putin. Like, come on, Putin, you're a punk. Meet me in Times Square and I would kick your butt, right? You're evil. You're this, you're that. And as long as I'm in America, I can say those things. But what about if I lived in Russia? And think about those. There was a I don't know if she was a spy or a prostitute or both. But when she was in America, she was telling secrets. And then the Trump administration did her dirty. She ended up getting, they made the airplane land and they arrested her and took her back. And you know what was interesting? Well, it was sad because she was in jail. We haven't heard. The last time we heard was at her hearing. But she was kind of like begging. She's like, what I said back then, I was crazy, but I'm better now. I know better now. Why? The fear, see? And what about North Korea? See, again, here's my point. Even though they are evil people, even though they are evil dictators, you have to be very careful because guess what? Your opinion of them doesn't erase the fact that they are in power. And so if you had to live under their dictatorship, your tone might be a little different, unless you didn't care about living or dying or suffering, being tortured in jail, maybe. But you see, when she says that, even if God was to exist, she wouldn't follow him. And that is I think that is one of the truest statements that reveal the sincerity and the truthfulness of their nature, meaning their sinful nature. And this is something that has happened throughout history. If you start with Lucifer, who in the presence of God rebelled against God. If you then move to Adam, whom God created Adam, gave him the planet, the entire planet, and he rebelled against God. Even if you had Israel, whom God created out of other nations, formed this nation here, and they repeatedly rebelled against God. Even though God did reveal himself to them, God did great wonders for them, they still rebelled. When Jesus came and said, I'm here to reveal the true nature of God. No man has seen God, but I'm here to reveal God. The Pharisees still rebelled against him. They rejected him. They knew who Jesus was, and they rejected him. They saw the miracles. They heard his preaching, in which I would now kind of interject. What has Jesus commanded you to do? That was wrong. See, what did he do? We can move on to the rise of the beast, who will rebel against God. He will boast against God. He will try to fight against God. He will try to fight. He will amass an army and will try to fight against Jesus at his return. And then, after Jesus comes, and there's 1,000 years in which he will live here. And by the way, that's his world. See, Brandon and Christy, have a big problem because they didn't create no world. They live in a world that God created. Now, after 1,000 years of Jesus being here, man will still attempt one more rebellion, one more overthrow. See, it doesn't matter. And as she said, even if he revealed himself, she would still reject him. That is such a true statement. All right, guys, I'm going to pick it up in part 2. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. And I will see you in part 2.